well, we have to talk about this F9 or F9 trailer.
You mean Fast Saga?
No, it's F9. I insist upon for the rest of until it comes out, I'm just going to be calling it F9.
You know what F10 is going to be though? It's going to be FX.
Ooh. But is that? I thought it was ending with this one.
No, there's a 10th one. I think this one's back to back.
Oh, okay.
So Justin Lin came back for these two. What I hope are actually the last two movies in the series,
except for the spinoffs.
Yes, except for the spinoffs. But I feel like we might get more. But it gets more ridiculous, and Vin Diesel becomes more and more hilarious at the end, and it's obvious that he needs to be carried by his other stars and the car stunts, I guess. And
no sign of The Rock in this one. He's got to lead the show. He's got John Cena on as a villain. They're bringing back Charlize Theron, who's a villain in the last one. And then the big reveal at the end of the trailer, which I thought would have you freaking out.
Han. Yes, Han is back. Oh my God. You're so right. I thought you were talking about the plot twist that they reveal in the trailer where John Cena is Vin Diesel's brother.
Oh, that, yeah.
And I don't know if that's supposed to throw fans off, but that reminds me of Bad Boys for Life. No spoilers.
Right.
But it seems to be a very common trope now where new characters are introduced much later after the fact, and they're introduced as a long lost sibling when you're just really? I mean, no mention of this in the past 8 movies.
Yeah, and in a saga all about family. I mean, it is a little bit odd, but
exactly. And I have to say, as much as I love Han being back, it kind of destroys Tokyo Drift.
Yeah, because the whole and this is something that all long running series have to sort of deal with is you feel the need to retcon yourself the further along you go, and kind of say oh, well, that thing that you were so cut up about when it happened originally, now that we're on movie 9 or movie 10 of this whole thing, we're kind of running out of ideas. So let's bring back a beloved fan character and just kind of explain away how they survived what was definitely meant originally as a very final death. They already did it with Michelle Rodriguez in the 5th or the 6th one. So and this very convoluted story about her not remembering who Dom was and all this stuff. So it's very much out of their own playbook, but still it's I don't know. You're the bigger fan of this, so I defer to you.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be a bad movie. There's very little doubt in my mind that this is just going to be brainless, but I'm just looking forward to some of the stunts and Han. So, okay, let's start the show.
Welcome to episode 67 of the Extra Buttery Podcast, a free-flowing conversation between two guys who love movies and TV. This time on the show, we're still catching up with a bit of Oscar talk, but also, some new stuff opening for the new year. So we're going to be talking about Bombshell, Uncut Gems, and The Gentleman. And, see where the conversation takes us after that. But coming to you from Toronto, my name is Robert Snow, and joining me from Vancouver is my co-host, Jason Chan. Of the stuff on the docket today, I'm kind of still, we're recording this about a week out from the Oscars. I've got, a handful of movies that I still have to see before the big show. And one of those for me was Bombshell, which kind of carved out a small place for itself in the overall list of nominees. It popped up on the Best Lead Actress, Best Supporting Actress, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling categories. And, I was curious enough about it. I remember when the trailer dropped and they cut it to Bad Girl or Bad Guy by Billie Eilish. I forget. I sound like a very ancient person right now. But
I wouldn't know because I'm not a huge Billie Eilish fan, but anyway, continue.
But this is a movie directed by Jay Roach
of Austin Powers fame.
Yeah, and I think when the casting and the topic were announced, people were like, really, Jay Roach, the guy who did Austin Powers? Because we're dealing with the story of Fox News and the 2016 election. and specifically the sexual harassment investigation that happened at Fox News.
Women are everywhere. We're letting them play golf and tennis now.
HR's on the phone because you called me a skirt.
Yeah, I got to read that manual again.
The attitude off camera was even worse. You're a man-hater. Learn to get along with the boys. You're sexy, but you're too much work. I have a whole list.
Will other women come forward?
So Jay Roach is kind of taking a bit of the Adam McKay Big Short technique here, where he's got some breaking the fourth wall kind of elements. He's got strong performances. He's got actors kind of trying to explain what could be a thorny or maybe alienating topic with bits of satire. I think I understand why this thing got the nominations that it did, because it does have some very strong performances. It does have some achievement in makeup and hairstyling, but the movie that kind of contains it is very messy. What did you think?
I wouldn't call it messy. I'd almost call it empty. I think for a movie that's potentially could be damaging had it portrayed certain things another way, I still don't think it dug deep enough into this whole like sexual harassment issue. It seemed like a very factual movie, but not even factual in the sense that it's as deep as Wikipedia or anything like that. I do think a lot of the movie's buoyed by the three leads who are all very good. But I also can't help but think that I wonder if in the hands of a female director that she wouldn't be more willing to tackle the subject matter a little more aggressively. Not maybe paint Roger Ailes in a more sympathetic light, which I think there is a bit of that in Jay Roach's version, but maybe not so much that there are just two camps in this struggle. And there are obviously many, many camps in this and many different viewpoints that they can go through, but they only tend to go through a couple of them.
Yeah.
The one perspective that I kind of had a little problem understanding was Margot Robbie's. Mm-hmm. So she plays this fictional character who is
composite kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And she is an up-and-coming sort of Fox employee who's very ambitious and wants to have her own show, like Gretchen and Megyn Kelly. And she catches Roger Ailes' eye, and there's this backstory about how she's a closet lesbian with a coworker at Fox who's also unwilling to come out of the closet because of the working environment at Fox. And so, yeah, I think unfocused is part of it, but also felt empty.
There was actually I think it was like a half-hour YouTube video that Megyn Kelly posted on her own YouTube channel.
Yeah, they've themselves spoken out against this movie, haven't they?
Well, it was interesting. I think it was kind of a mixture in terms of her reaction, because she gathered together a couple of other people who were, I think they were accusers in the investigation.
Right.
They weren't like big names in the way that Megyn Kelly or Gretchen Carlson were, but they were still, victims. And she got them around a table and they kind of had an in-depth conversation about the movie and what really happened. And it actually turned out that the video and the discussion were fairly well received, because people felt that, it would have been easy for Megyn Kelly to just sort of come down hard on the movie and complain that it was all like too many artistic liberties were taken and it was full of inaccuracies. But she said that quite a bit of it was actually very accurate to what happened. There were a few areas where it tripped up pretty hard, namely this one exchange, which is kind of like the climax of the movie, when Megyn Kelly goes to speak to Kayla Papazel, which is Margot Robbie's character, and try to convince Kayla to come forward and join the list of accusers, because that's sort of seen as like the nail in the coffin for Roger Ailes at Fox. And in order to kind of get Kayla onto her side, Megyn basically says to Kayla, she's one of the first people that Megyn has ever said this to, reveals that Roger Ailes harassed her. And this revelation is kind of like from such a big name at Fox is enough to kind of get Kayla to say, yeah, it's happening to me. It's happening to me right now. He's actively harassing me. But then in the space of like probably less than 2 minutes, the tables totally turn. And all of a sudden, Kayla becomes accusatory of Megyn and kind of says, oh, well, I appreciate that you told me what you did, but also you're sort of to blame here, because you could have blown the whistle on Roger Ailes way back when it originally happened to you 15 years ago. And then maybe myself and all these other women wouldn't have been harassed. She has this like incredibly like kind of like not two-faced, but like she has this huge change of opinion towards Megyn Kelly in the space of a very little amount of time. I don't think anybody who's in that situation where you're like still like a junior person in your workplace and somebody comes to you and reveals this huge thing and is incredibly vulnerable with you, and then you're like, oh wow, okay, and then you make a big choice yourself, a big life choice to kind of join a sexual assault allegation or like a group case, and then come down hard on the person who just kind of revealed this huge thing to you. So it kind of spoke to like this aspect of the movie that really wants to kind of like clean everything up with screenwriting and to insert a plot and move things forward faster than they really would happen in real life. And that was something that Megyn Kelly in her video said, you know, this is bullshit. Like this would never have happened like this. You know, if anything, a person who was in Kayla's position would maybe take a few days or weeks to kind of like maybe get angry about how, you know, Megyn Kelly might have perpetuated something.
I think that's just like one of the number of things I've had with Margot Robbie's character. I didn't feel like she was needed. I think in better hands, writing wise, I don't think you really need her to make this plot move forward or make it any like more thrilling. I think the part where Gretchen is waiting for the judgment about the lawsuit against Roger Ailes and how later on the Murdoch family got involved. I think these are really tense moments that could have worked had it been, I think, better written, better edited. I didn't necessarily like how everything had to move linearly. I think if you want to talk about different perspectives, I think maybe in certain points, especially with Margot Robbie getting harassed by Ailes in the movie, had they, you know, maybe presented her as having experienced this sort of thing, but never told the audience. I think maybe there was another layer of tension that you could have there. I am baffled, along with you, why this is getting so much attention. I will say, though, Margot Robbie did a really good job, but I don't think her screen time was enough to earn a nomination, and I don't like the character itself. I don't know how much of a criteria that is for when you're like nominating for people in roles, but I feel like, I mean, the quality of the role has to be to a certain depth for you to appreciate and for the artist to like dig into.
The movie is weirdly kind of like not all that interested in her because
yeah, a little bit. They brush her aside sometimes.
It puts her forward as this like, you know, important figure, and granted she's a composite character, so she's supposed to reflect the experiences of several women at Fox.
Yeah, but
I don't need it. This thing like what really kind of like made me sort of sit up and question the whole thing was how she goes out drinking with Kate McKinnon's character. They end up going back to Kate McKinnon's character's apartment and they have sex. And then they kind of like, they discuss how Kate McKinnon's character is actually kind of, not only is she gay, but she's kind of a closet Democrat who supports Hillary Clinton in the election.
Right.
And this kind of gives Margot Robbie's character a bit of pause because it causes her to kind of reflect on like, oh, well, maybe not everyone at Fox is a card-carrying Republican who supports Donald Trump. Like,
yeah, and so
it gives her pause. But then what's really weird is the two characters go back to work and they never talk about the fact that they got drunk and had sex, and they have no real relationship after that point. They just become like desk mates in the newsroom again. And that struck me as very weird because you would think for two characters who had been that intimate with each other to have a very different type of relationship after that point.
You know,
and
maybe kudos to them for having a professionalism in the workplace.
Still, though, I mean, it felt like it had been re-scripted halfway through.
I think my biggest gripe about that scene you just talked about was the fact that they go into about how like, oh, there's a closet lesbian Democrat working for Fox. And just like, okay, so what point are you making? That not all Fox employees are Republicans, or that all Democrats are closet lesbians? Like, I don't understand why you can just bring that forward and not really discuss it, other than like throw away lines, be like, oh, you're a closet lesbian? Yeah. oh, you're a Democrat? Yeah. And then just move on. That was a big problem. Charlize Theron, though, I thought was really, really good. What did you think?
Oh, yeah.
And so was John Lithgow as Roger Ailes. Although, like, he really played him into, like, the big, fat, old, crotchety man kind of caricature.
If anything, it might end up winning for the makeup and hairstyling, even though it's it's a fairly tough category this year. There's a lot of good movies in that category, but the fact that, like, I think Charlize Theron had to get something like several dozen different prosthetics put on her face every time she went on in front of the camera, because they had to very subtly, like, they had to change the distance between her eyes and the way her nose looked and around her cheekbones and her face, and they were just very subtly sculpting it. And they put so much.
It was incredible.
So much effort into that. They did similar stuff with John Lithgow for Roger Ailes, but then. Here's the weird part, and it kind of speaks to, like, some of the other issues with the movie. There's this lack of consistency throughout the whole thing about how much effort they take to recreate real people, because they'll, spend all that time and money making Theron and Lithgow look like their real life counterparts, but then they'll do stuff like they'll just rely on real news footage of the real people in various cutaways for no good reason. At other times, did you catch the moment where they have a lookalike actor with Bill O'Reilly's face CGI'd onto his face?
No, I thought it was actual archival footage of Bill O'Reilly.
Well, they definitely used real Bill O'Reilly footage in, I think you see him on TV once talking to Stephen Colbert or something. But there's a scene with Bill O'Reilly, a lookalike actor, hanging out in the newsroom with everyone, just sort of shooting the breeze with a few other recognizable people. And they've got
no, I didn't.
They've got lookalike actors playing people like Geraldo Rivera and other people hanging out with them in this little newsroom shot. But then if you look at Bill O'Reilly, it's an actor who has the same, like, face shape, but then they've projected digitally this CGI mask of Bill O'Reilly onto the guy's face, and it's a very poor match. So sometimes, like, the eyes are too far down on the skull, and it's kind of floating in a weird way, a little bit like Cats. And if it had been on screen for any longer, it would have been the talk of film Twitter, because it is horrifying. It's like this weird CGI puppet, and I'm like, it kind of speaks to the whole movie, because they can't make up their mind. Are they going to do lookalike actors with convincing practical makeup effects? Are they going to do weird CGI puppets? Are they going to do the real life clips? I don't get it.
I did not notice that, but next time, there won't be a next time because I'm not watching this movie again. Yeah. But maybe I'll find some sort of internet meme at some point about it. But the thing with Charlize Theron is, I know that's Charlize Theron, but she totally, like, is Megyn Kelly on the screen. That was kind of crazy. It threw me for a loop. Mm-hmm. Final thoughts? I thought this was one of the most overrated movies. I can't believe this movie was one of the movies that one, like, an anonymous Oscar voter said that he thought was excellent. I was like, you totally just showed me who you are. Like, I totally guess your demographic right now. I
don't know what to make of, like, Jay Roach kind of being Adam McKay V2 or whatever with these sort of fact-based dramas. With satirical elements. I don't think it's really working for him. Adam McKay can barely pull it off.
I don't think this movie was very good at all.
No, there's always a few of them like this every year who get they squeak in various categories, but they're for some reason or other they're in there, and it's hard to kind of, like, square it all off. So probably, like, if you want to take, like, an atmospheric kind of, like, jump in terms of quality, we've got Uncut Gems.
I made a crazy risk, a gamble, and it's about to pay off.
So I want the Celtics to cover. I want the Celtics halftime. I want Garnett points and rebounds.
What do you know?
I don't know. I just know.
Well, I'll tell you what I know. It's the dumbest fucking bet I ever heard of.
I disagree. Gary.
Now, this is something that I saw at TIFF, and I think I was trying to convince people in the months leading up to it, and we've talked about it here on the show before, but now you've actually had a chance to see it, so we can talk about it in some detail. Remember when I quoted that person who basically described it as watching this movie is like waking up in the hospital realizing that you were in a car crash and you fainted at the wheel in busy traffic and hallucinated half of the movie. I think that's roughly what they said, but anyway, it was very well put and summed up the experience of watching this movie. Do you agree?
I agree to a certain degree. I do feel like maybe myself, I kind of hyped this up a little too much. But I think that sort of like trippy sense that you get, like how you kind of got hit over the head. I think a lot of it has to do with the colors it has.
Yeah.
The cinematography, a lot of bright colors, a lot of gem-like colors. There are hues of green and blue everywhere, even though a lot of the people wear leather jackets. Yeah. And the music was amazing.
Yeah.
So Daniel Lopatin, I don't know his name. Daniel Lopatin, he did the music for this, and I'm a big like fan of synth music and keyboard music when it comes to soundtrack. It starts with Blade Runner, Vangelis, who did that, and then
yes.
So that was the first thing that struck me. I do kind of get the sense why people would be like, wow, this kind of hits you, like blindsides you, because a lot of things happen so fast and so quickly.
Yeah.
The only thing that I kind of maybe didn't expect was how messy it is. I think it really helps that having Adam Sandler play this like really fast talking Jewish jeweler really helps. But at times I didn't know exactly where the focus is. Like, it's just layers and layers and layers of tenseness until you just can't hold it anymore.
Yeah. This is something that like the two directors, the Safdie brothers, Josh and Benny Safdie, they've been developing this style for some time now, starting with some like very like, in terms of release and the number of people who have seen them, very small movies, very low budgets. And they got to this point with the 2017 movie Good Time with Robert Pattinson, who was arguably like the biggest actor that they'd ever worked with. And not only that, but it kind of coincided with critics rediscovering Robert Pattinson. But Good Time was a similar experience where you see this character who is just digging himself ever deeper into a pit of bad decisions, and just when you think he's going to turn around and actually make a smart decision, he makes like 5 more bad decisions. And they seem to be kind of like fixated on characters like that, and
really self-destructive characters.
Yeah, and it just gives you this sense of like total anxiety by proxy. And I think it's that experience that like kind of, you know, because it can provoke such a visceral reaction in you, I think that's what makes them like really important filmmakers to watch, because you're not just kind of sitting back, kind of basking in this. You're really in it.
Yeah, and with like the keyboard music too, it's very like dystopian, I would say. Like the notes are very sparse throughout, so you're kind of expecting a melody or something.
Yeah, there's this cosmic kind of thing where like
exactly.
The movie opens with this kind of constellation with like brightly lit gases in like a galaxy far, far away,
and you end up basically up his ass.
Yeah, but then it's kind of like
metaphorically like up his ass.
Because he's having a colonoscopy when we kind of zoom out of
exactly.
But
and the notes come in just like sparse enough where you're just like waiting for something to happen, which is like just like ridiculous situations he gets himself into. The other thing is like there's like a big basketball element to it, because his character starts betting a lot of Celtics games, and so this was a part where like I feel like if you already knew the games that it refers to, and the movie takes place in like 2012, I think it was. Mm-hmm. You already kind of know the outcome of the basketball games. So if you knew that, there's the final climax, he bets like a 3 or 6 way parlay on the Boston Celtics. However the game unfolds, you know that the ending is the opposite of that, because it like really just like sets you up for this big turning point where Adam Sandler's character goes to the point of no return. Mm-hmm. And it happens in the climactic end and is crazy. Like, I wouldn't say it's unexpected, but I think it happened so quick and so fast that it just, you can't help but just feel shocked, because you really are kind of rooting for this character, as like despicable as he is, which is just odd, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's, again, it speaks to like the strength of their writing and Sandler as a lead performer, because
This is so suitable for him, this role.
Yeah, anybody going into this movie, you know, you're kind of in one of two camps. You either only know Sandler from his comedy movies and his very, like, you know, broad, crass kind of stuff that he's been doing for Netflix most recently, or you know him for that, but also the very limited number of dramas that he's done. Mm-hmm. And you kind of like, if you're in, I'm in the latter camp where like, I'm aware of his crass comedies. I've only watched a few of them, but I'm very respectful of what he's done in stuff like Punch Drunk Love and certainly in this one. Knowing what he's like as a performer, he's kind of like your guide through this crazy world. And you have a bit of a hatred of his work actually outside of this movie, which kind of informs how you see his character in a weird sort of like labyrinthine sort of way. You hate what he does to people and you hate, you know, how he does it, but you still sort of want to see him come out. It's a bizarre reaction that kind of like mirrors my own like reaction to his to the rest of his career. So it's like the rest of the movie. It's very, very layered, and it's there's a lot of stuff to pick apart.
The other thing is Julia Fox, who I think really helps make this character likable because she herself is so in love with him, and you always want to root for that love story to pull through. And I think that's the other reason why we really root for Howard Ratner. Did you have any thoughts about Adam Sandler versus Joaquin Phoenix in the Best Actor race for this?
I mean, if he had been nominated, it would have been a very interesting conversation, I think, because
I think we all agree that he deserves to be nominated. The question is, will he beat Joaquin Phoenix?
I don't think he would. I think comedy actors have a very hard time when they do these kind of drama roles. And
better question, do you think he deserves to beat Joaquin Phoenix?
I sort of think he does.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Because the one thing that Phoenix, like, as much as I appreciate what he was doing in that, I feel like there's this thing about, and it occurred to me actually when we were talking about the Oscars last episode too, there's this sense in like in the Academy where if you have an actor like Phoenix who does this dramatic weight loss and kind of twists his brain into knots trying to perform a character like the Joker, that somehow they just de facto win because of that, you know, these crazy, and that it kind of says about the award. It says like, well, this award goes to the person who's willing to put themselves through the most amount of like emotional torture and physical torture to portray a character. And I feel like that's a
Charlize Theron. You have to put on prosthetics and be ugly or be someone else.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, you know, I see the logic in it, but I also don't think it's the best example to set for other actors, other people in the business, because you know, there are plenty of performances like Adam Sandler and Uncut Gems where you can go to crazy places without, you know, destroying your body or wrecking your family life and stuff like that. And I don't subscribe to the idea that like you have to turn yourself into a terrible creature just to, you know, get a good performance.
But is that points off Joaquin Phoenix's like portrayal though?
Yeah.
You think it's points off?
I think it is. Yeah. Because, well, maybe not points off his portrayal, but points off of the Academy for consistently rewarding people who do that.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, I got it.
I don't think Joaquin Phoenix cares one way or the other. Like clearly he is an actor, you know, and he's done it in other performances too, where he, you know, he uses his body and his physicality as part of his method, right?
Yeah. Well, clearly he cares. It's just the Academy shouldn't only care when it's self-torture.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, they just shown a pattern of that over the years, and it's just not a great example to set. And I feel like, you know, for somebody like Sandler who is taking almost as much of a risk with a role like Uncut Gems, in this, at least in terms of his career, because he could very happily take hundreds of millions of dollars from Netflix from now until the day that he retires. And,
well, he's got 240 million more.
Well, yeah, and he could only make like crass comedies that he just sort of churns out with his buddies and just be really lazy. But instead, he took a risk on these young filmmakers and arguably pushed their careers and the careers of all of these like randoms that they like first time people that the Safdies pulled off the street, and kind of like, you know, he is a producer and a big name. You know, he's helping make better movies by being involved in it.
Yeah.
And I think he deserves props for that.
Yeah, true. I think maybe for him, obviously an actor always just acts, so he probably still enjoys it. And he's at the point where, like, I mean, unless you really have like a big ego, like I feel like the money's just kind of secondary to him now.
It is, yeah.
So if he's acting in drama, he's obviously interested in it. If he's interested in it, I think that's great.
Yeah. Well, he sat down for the Hollywood Reporter roundtable, which they do once a year, usually around the Oscars. And he was there with a bunch of people who were nominated for Best Actor this year. And I have to hand it to THR for, like, you know, they cast up those roundtable discussions, usually with like a majority of people who are nominated for the awards that applies. But then they also include a few people who arguably should have been nominated.
Wasn't Shia LaBeouf there too?
Yeah, he was. And that was like, it was basically him and Sandler were kind of like the guys who were there who arguably should have been nominated but weren't. And the whole time
and they took enormous risks. Right?
Exactly. And the whole time Sandler was like, you could tell that he was feeling a little bit insecure about his presence there because he was there with De Niro and with Adam Driver. And
he's just kind of like an awkward dude in interviews sometimes though.
Yeah, but he was always, he literally said in a few clips where he was like, I don't know if I belong here, you know? Yeah. And I'm like, no, dude, you do. Like, do you belong there 90% of the time that you're on screen? No, but but for this 10%,
I will not have you slander any of his movies, including Big Daddy's.
Okay. But anyway, like, you know, I just think he, like, the whole movie was robbed in general.
I think so.
You know, I don't even want it to see it win necessarily in a lot of the categories, but I think like some kind of nomination or acknowledgement would have been good. And it just, like, you know, it totally got missed, and so I'm basically mounting, you know, as usual, a one-man PR campaign with anyone who will listen, being like, go see Uncut Gems, or, well, now it's on Netflix for people outside of the US, so, you know, add it to your queue.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth watching. I'm not like over the moon about it, but it's definitely like a solid 4 out of 4, 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I mean,
somewhere up there.
The level of anxiety that it provokes does not make for like a chill Saturday evening. Like,
no, and it comes in like I think proper breaks in between.
Yeah.
I think it's not like 2 hours of straight like intense emotions. Like, there are other films that do that. This one at least takes a break in between, and I think that's where like the women in this movie really step in and really hold this movie up. So Julia Fox and Menzel.
You almost said Adele Dazeem, didn't you?
Dude,
Travolta.
I was like, don't mess up the name. And I thought about that Travolta name. Yes, Idina Menzel, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, okay. But okay, yeah, so I think this deserves a spot in Best Original Screenplay.
Yep.
I really like the way the character's written, but again, like, I would be kind of interested to see who else they had envisioned in this title role, because Adam Sandler is so quintessentially like New York and Jewish.
I think they wrote it with him in mind.
Yeah, okay. So like it was very extreme, like realistic version of like an amalgamation of all these like goofball characters that he's played in the past. Mm-hmm. And just cranked to 10, and the moral meter just like cranked to 0.
Yeah.
He's always played this like lovable, goofy, really good guy. But this one, he plays this lovable, or not despicable, goofy guy that you really want to root for.
Yeah, it twists you up inside in the best and worst ways. So it for that reason alone, it gets my recommendation.
Mm-hmm. And just the colors, the cinematography, the music, it's all very well done too.
Yeah. So like, give me more Safdie stuff. I don't know what they're gonna do next, but and the cool thing about them is that they're always making stuff. Like, only a couple of weeks after this thing started rolling out in theaters in like a limited release, they posted a random short film that they'd made with Adam Sandler on Vimeo for free. Benny Safdie, one of the two directors, who, you know, he's also an actor. He's appeared in some of their other movies. Benny Safdie and Adam Sandler play dueling living statues in Times Square who are fighting over a street corner. And it's like the short is like 6 or 7 minutes long, and it's all shot very kind of guerrilla style, documentary style. But, the idea just came to them and they ran out and did it without, even bothering to make a big deal about it. And it, I don't know, I respect I've big respect for the way they work.
One thing I kind of want to point out, the editing in this film, did you find it sometimes confusing?
I wasn't.
And do you think that was done on purpose?
I wasn't like confused about where the characters were. I think there's a lot of sensory overload that I think is intentional.
Yes, that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think they're like, they definitely could have cleaned things up and taken elements out, but I think they leave it in there just to kind of like, just batter you with all of this sound and color and stuff.
Yeah, especially in his office where he's like walking around the cases and he's going to his back office, which is kind of like a weird L shape, and he's got the man trap, the double buzzer doors.
Yeah.
And sometimes like it's just disorienting, and I wonder if that was done on purpose. And if so, like, good job. You really threw my head for a loop there.
Yeah, because it walks a fine line between like hammering you with all this stuff.
Yes.
But without like annoying you, because there are other movies that will like try to do that and kind of like get the mix wrong, and will just like you come out of it being like, I don't want to go through that again.
And I can see why the Academy doesn't like this film. Because they don't like films that make them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, there's argument for that. Yeah, I mean the stuff
like, it's the same with Bombshell. I think had it been more controversial, I don't think the Academy would have liked it as much as they did.
Yeah.
And clearly they did with all the nominations it got. And so it's interesting about the Joker again, which led all the nominations. I think this is the Academy's way of saying, and I think I've said this before, is that if you want to do edgy, this is how you do it. And if you want to do a comic book movie, this is how you do it. This is the only comic book that will accept to be of this caliber. Even though in the realm of comic book movies, I think The Dark Knight still blows it away.
And it was funny to watch the directors roundtable from THR about how, where they put
I didn't see
Scorsese
this.
and Phillips across the table from each other. And there was a moment where I was trying to read Scorsese's face, because clearly, like, he waded into this whole discussion a couple months ago with like Marvel versus cinema and all of that.
Yes.
And here he is confronted with a guy who not only made $1 billion and a huge profit, off of like a $60 million budget, doing a superhero movie, but he did it by kind of like aping a lot of Scorsese's biggest hits from the 70s. Taxi Driver, King of Comedy.
Well, it's also not a Marvel.
Well, it's not, but I don't think Scorsese makes that distinction. He just knows that it's based on a comic book. And I think like...
Yeah, but that's his point though. Like, I think there's a difference between a Marvel movie and a Joker.
Yeah, and Phillips is trying to like pay homage to him. He's trying to like, worship at the feet of this guy who's sitting across the table from him. And Stephen Galloway from THR, who hosts the roundtables, he's kind of like, he's not trying to like set the two of them against each other, but it's clear that he's picking up on a bit of a tension there, and and he's trying to contrast. Like they get into this discussion about, Phillips feels that he was unfairly maligned. He and Phoenix were unfairly maligned by the media in the discussion of like the violence, and he compares that to what Scorsese had to go through with The Last Temptation of Christ, when all of the evangelical and Catholic Christian groups came after Scorsese for that movie. And they're trying to draw these parallels, and like, Galloway asks Scorsese if he's like, you were a producer on the Joker for a while, but then you dropped off of it, and like, why'd you do that? And and there's clearly stuff going on there that wasn't really captured like in the discussion, but is still kind of like lurking in the background, and it's worth a watch. Anyway, I mean, they get into some lots of great discussions in that episode. It's probably one of the better ones of the directors roundtables they've done in a few years.
Right. Okay.
So then that leaves us with like one of the newer movies that we've discussed so far this year, now that it's January, the new Guy Ritchie project, The Gentleman.
The plot begins to thicken. Now, I can't be specific about the heroes and zeros, but our protagonist is a hungry animal. There is a lot of money hanging in the balance. Our antagonist explodes on the scene like a millennial firework and has indirectly started a war.
So this is like a return to the Guy Ritchie that we all kind of became familiar with when he kind of appeared on the scene in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes.
Before he started making like big budget stuff like, you know, the King Arthur cinematic universe thing that didn't really work, and the Aladdin reboot and all of that.
Yeah, so the Aladdin reboot was just like a kind of weird step for him. But I think anyone who's seen his movies know him for his kind of editing style and his quirky characters and how his plot is never quite straightforward. So Aladdin was kind of a weird step. This, however, The Gentleman, is an interesting, I wouldn't say return to form, but more like a return to the Guy Ritchie Reno, kind of like how Terrence Malick did A Hidden Life, and it was kind of like a quote-unquote return to form. So The Gentleman is about a group of gangsters. Of course, with Guy Ritchie, it's always got to be about gangsters. Matthew McConaughey plays this American transplant in England from basically poverty, gets a scholarship at Oxford, and then drops out and becomes basically the biggest weed dealer in the country. The one thing I want to point out before I continue with the plot is Matthew McConaughey's backstory as Mickey, the character he plays. Thank God they gave him this American background, because I have no confidence that he can pull off a good British accent.
Oh yeah, that would have been a nightmare.
He is one of those American actors that can only play Americans. And it's just, thank God Guy Ritchie didn't have to torture with any of us with that. So that was a good thing. But anyway, along comes another American billionaire named Matthew Berger. And he's going to buy Mickey's drug empire, and Mickey's going to retire. And Hugh Grant plays this PI who's been hired by this British tabloid. And he gets a whiff of this deal, and then he thinks, well, how can I better myself? Oh, okay, I know. I'm going to learn everything about this deal, gather all the information, present it to the rival gangs, and see how much I can squeeze from both of them. And so the other rival gang would be this Asian gang and one of their underlings, who's played by Henry Goldingen. He's known as Dry Eye. And it sets off this series of like really crazy events where people turn on each other, backstab each other. Along the way, they're met by this group of amateur boxers who pick fights with people and then uploads the videos to YouTube for likes.
Of course.
They're led by this well-meaning and really, really hilarious coach played by Colin Farrell. And I don't want to spoil too much, and I can't even explain the plot straightforward right now because it's just too long, convoluted. But if you like the Guy Ritchie humor, like the really crash sort of Cockney English slang and stories about drugs and conspiracies and tons of money and a random cast of really quirky but really funny characters, I think you would enjoy this. It is too long. There are parts that drag. For example, a lot of the plot is sort of like revealed in a conversation between Charlie Hunnam's character, who is Mickey's right-hand person, and Hugh Grant's journalist. And they have these like fireside chats. And because neither of them, I think, are very endearing or have a lot of chemistry with each other, it drags. And so half the time you're trying to like fast forward, and the other time you're just giggling your butt off because Guy Ritchie somehow slipped into this movie lines like, "There's fuckery afoot." And you're like, yep, that is exactly what a Guy Ritchie movie is. There's a lot of fuckery.
That's a good line, yeah. And very Guy Ritchie. I mean, this kind of like blending of like a slangy kind of curse word with a kind of vaguely Shakespearean or
yes,
Victorian kind of thing. And
there's
you're right. He's the only guy who makes crime movies or crime comedy things that are remotely like that.
Yeah. There's a rhythm to the way his characters talk.
Yeah.
And it's very like captivating and interesting. And he somehow finds all the right people to do this kind of stuff. Colin Farrell in this one, Brad Pitt in Snatch. That was another one where like it comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, and it's like and he's also shown like a bit of an interest, kind of like the Safdies in Uncut Gems, for casting people that you wouldn't normally peg as actors. Like, what's the name of that big burly guy that he's put in a couple of his earlier movies, like his pre-Disney stuff?
Vinnie Jones.
Yeah, he was like basically like
he later became Juggernaut in X-Men.
That's true, yeah. But like Vinnie Jones, I think at the time that Guy Ritchie found him was more of like a bouncer and kind of like a street tough who happened to have this very charismatic personality. And Guy Ritchie noticed that wherever it was that he encountered him and said, "Hey, do you want to be in this movie?" And it, again, and then of course it kicked off like what became a bit of a career for Vinnie Jones. But the characters that Vinnie Jones played in Guy Ritchie's movies felt very kind of well-informed and like observant and lived in a way that's hard to get by just scripting them. And I guess like I don't know a huge amount about Guy Ritchie's background. I mean, did he grow up in a kind of neighborhood, kind of seeing people like this? Is it sort of, well, obviously he doesn't live like that now because he's made millions of dollars from being married to Madonna and all that. But the kind of like the origins must feel like they must have been vaguely.
Well, like this is very interesting that you kind of bring up his personal life because he actually is like well connected. So I don't know what kind of like background he grew up in, but it must have been at least affluent because I think his mom or his stepmom is a baroness of some kind.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he comes from this like actually like higher education, sort of British royalty bloodline. Keep in mind, this guy married Madonna at one point. Like he was Madonna's husband.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, but he seems to be like the dark sheep of his family when it comes to that. Like there's an edge to him that doesn't scream like refined British royalty. Even when like something as like British as like Sherlock Holmes in his hands becomes all of a sudden more like edgy, more street, less sophisticated in like as a compliment,
Yeah, and somehow he's been able to kind of like skirt those two worlds without. Like I've never heard people describe him as being like a poser or anything. Like he clearly knows something about the world that he's depicting.
Well, it's the same thing with Travis Knight and Phil Knight. Like we were just talking about how his dad is the head of Nike, and
right.
No one ever gives Travis shit for that because Travis is really good at what he does. The same thing with Guy Ritchie is he's had a few duds, but he's really good at what he does, and having convoluted plots with ridiculously crazy characters is his bread and butter, and he does it very, very well.
Yeah.
I do recommend you see it, actually. I think you'll find parts of it very amusing. The most disgusting parts are even amusing on its own, especially the end involving like what happens to the head of the tabloid who hires Hugh Grant. Yeah, so Michelle Dockery is really great in this. I think she deserves a special mention because she's, I think, like the only female character in this movie.
Oh yeah,
and
one of those.
Yeah, but she, as the only woman, she's also like the only straight shooter, I feel like. She keeps the boys in line, so to speak.
This is the time when I still like call out to, maybe, I don't know, as Netflix or Amazon or somebody like that, to front the cash for Man from U.N.C.L.E. 2.
Oh, yes.
Because
oh, my God.
Man from U.N.C.L.E. was like, admittedly, it had an ending that was a little bit messy, if I remember correctly.
Well, it set itself for a sequel.
Well, yeah, not just that, but like the climax and how they got rid of the villain was a little bit kind of, I remember that scene, and
I see. Okay.
He was leaning on his like kind of multi-camera comic book panel kind of editing a little bit too heavily in that final sequence, if I remember. But yeah, he does call out for a sequel really, really hard, and that would have been something that would have worked really well as a series or even a TV show. I don't know, but you would need, the trick is that you would need Henry Cavill, Armie Hammer, and Alicia Vikander to come back. And they're all very expensive, very busy people. So I don't know it's all that.
Is Alicia Vikander still expensive these days?
Yeah, she's had a few duds recently, hasn't she? Yeah. But Henry Cavill's still expensive. I mean, The Witcher just
not as expensive as Superman, but he did a really good job with Mission Impossible, And The Witcher now?
Yeah, and I've been watching The Witcher, and it's like I'm into it.
It's
like,
so like, oh my, it's a bit much.
Are you having a hard time with some of the like the violence and stuff?
Not necessarily the violence, but like the overall plot.
Oh,
it's a little all over the place, and there's a lot of like world building stuff I need to catch up on.
There is, yeah.
So it's taken like, I haven't finished it yet either, but it's taken like a few episodes to kind of like gather my marbles.
Yes. I remember watching I watched the first episode and I was like, whoa, I feel like I should have read the novels before I got into this.
The first episode I think was okay. It was the second episode where I was like, what?
Yeah, because then they kind of like front load in a bunch of characters who hadn't been mentioned at all in the first episode. And you would have thought, you know, for the first episode of a show to kind of at least introduce us to a few of these other people who are now going to be running the show in number 2. But anyway, yeah, it could be a symptom of like the show still trying to find its feet, you know, in the way that first seasons of TV often do.
I don't know if you noticed, but there is a bit of backlash against the gentleman, as with all Guy Ritchie films, that he's racist, he's sexist, he's all sorts of things.
Oh, is this the Colin Farrell Vietnamese joke?
Yes. That's part of it. I, as an Asian person, but not Vietnamese, didn't really take offense to it, but there are other characters in the movie that aren't Vietnamese. But I think in general, Guy Ritchie doesn't shy away from punching any sort of person in any sort of class, race, or gender. I think he's a very equal opportunity
insult artist.
Yeah, insult artist. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. So in that sense, no, I don't find anything wrong with it. It's just, I think his style. I think when you really single out a certain person or a certain race or whatever, and then really, I think in a really mean-hearted way, go after them and say they're no good or whatnot, that's when it becomes problematic.
Yeah, and I mean, like, what's so bad about Colin Farrell in his Irish accent, you know, calling attention to the way this Vietnamese guy's first name is pronounced.
Believe me, we've all had that joke somewhere. Like, someone has a fucking funny name and you just can't help yourself. And you're in this awkward stage where you're trying to figure it out. And you're not trying to be offensive or anything, but you legitimately, like, am just baffled at some of the things that they don't know.
If anything, the clip is an example of Farrell's character trying to, you know, work his way towards some kind of, like, acceptance. Because he basically says, like...
Yeah.
His name is Fahok, but spelled with a PH, so it sounds like Fahok.
Please.
All right, Fahok, Conda Fahok.
Please.
He is the best character in that film, like, full stop.
Oh, okay,
he is like this really well-meaning coach, and if you go see it, he's not in a movie that much, but every scene he's in, he steals. Bottom line, go see Uncut Gems.
Queue it up on Netflix because it's pretty easy to get now, especially if you're living outside of the US. And coming up on the next episode of this show, we're going to be catching up on all of the winners of the Oscars. We are going to mull over whether the awards went to the right people. We'll also probably be talking about the new Margot Robbie fronted DC project, Birds of Prey. But in the meantime, head on over to kinetoscope.ca, where we have Jason's most anticipated movies of 2020, which will be kind of like, that'll be a kind of a living thing. It's kind of centered right up on the front page of the site. We'll be modifying it as the year goes by, and, you know, maybe adding some links to reviews for these things as we get a chance to see them. We'll also have my Oscar predictions. I'm going to try to get that article up before the ceremony actually happens. Until the next episode, my name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.